Salt Lake City freezes solid. In the vast, anonymous maze of a rail yard, an old German shepherd named Canine Kaiser didn't just sniff out contraband, he wept. His tears streamed down his graying muzzle, landing on the snow beside a rusted shipping container. Inside, a 3-year-old boy, sedated and silent in his navy blue sweater, was the devastating evidence. For Detective Alara Vance, that tiny boy was the first warning. But what Kaiser truly smelled was the olfactory signature of panic that led her not just to a cartel, but to the monster hiding behind the perfect smile of Senator Sterling, the same monster who stole her daughter 10 years ago. The trail ends in a blizzard, where a final bullet forces a choice, life or truth. What happens next will make you believe that God's greatest miracles are often delivered on 4 desperate, loyal paws. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The iron grip of a Salt Lake City winter was unforgiving. It was the kind of cold that didn't just chill the bone, but seemed to freeze the very air you breathed, coating the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Union Pacific Rail Depot in a thick, blinding blanket of snow. The floodlights overhead cast sickly yellow circles in the swirling white haze, illuminating endless rows of steel containers, each one a sealed metal coffin hurtling across the country, carrying everything from consumer goods to secrets best left buried. The wind howled a mournful, constant dirge against the metal, a sound that underscored the grim reality of this nocturnal patrol. Detective Alara Vance, 40 years old and weathered by a decade in the unforgiving world of missing persons and trafficking, pulled her thick, dark navy tactical parka tighter. Her shoulder-length blonde hair, usually meticulously kept, was now windswept and dusted with snow, framing a face dominated by a pair of striking ice-blue eyes that held both professional vigilance and a deeply personal pain. Alara was not just a detective. She was a survivor, a woman whose life had been fractured 10 years ago by the unexplained disappearance of her own daughter, Holly. That tragedy had sculpted her into a relentless, often solitary force, making her as cold and determined as the landscape she currently traversed. She wore heavy, insulated boots that crunched audibly in the pristine snow, the only sound apart from the distant rumble of the freight yard. Beside her marched Canine Kaiser, an 11-year-old male German shepherd. Kaiser was large, robust, with a solid black and tan coat that was starting to show faint streaks of gray around his muzzle, a testament to his years of service. He moved with a measured, almost stoic dignity, a classic image of canine excellence, though a subtle limp in his left rear leg hinted at the wear and tear of a long, physically demanding career. Kaiser was more than just a partner. He was Alara's constant, silent confidant, his steady presence a necessary ballast against the turbulent waters of her mind. Unlike many high-strung working dogs, Kaiser possessed a rare stillness, a calm that often unnerved suspects but offered profound comfort to Alara. Tonight, however, his posture was tense, his usual measured focus edged with an unusual jitteriness. They were working the late shift, targeting high-risk containers identified by intelligence suggesting unusual transport patterns, a routine task aimed at sniffing out contraband and illegal crossings. They passed rows of container cars, Kaiser's nose working efficiently near the seals, his tail giving small, steady thumps of confirmation that the contents were standard. Then, they reached the loading area for Track 7. The air here felt different, thicker, even amidst the biting cold. Kaiser stopped dead in his tracks before a massive, rust-pitted shipping container, its metallic shell a dull gray blue. The dog didn't just alert, he didn't give the standard sharp bark indicating a positive hit. Instead, a low, guttural growl vibrated deep in his chest, a sound Alara hadn't heard in years. His hackles rose slightly, and his focus was absolute, his entire body rigid with intensity. "What is it, boy?" Alara whispered, pulling him back slightly on the lead. She expected the sharp, rapid barks that signified narcotics or explosives, but the sound that came next was profoundly unsettling. Kaiser let out a sound that was less a bark and more a choke, a high-pitched, desperate whine. Alara watched, horrified, as actual tears began to well up in his dark, intelligent eyes, streaming down his graying snout and hitting the fresh snow, where they instantly froze into tiny, dark beads. It was an involuntary, desperate response, the kind of emotional distress usually reserved for extreme fear or pain, and Alara had never witnessed it in her highly trained, fiercely controlled canine. This was not a drug alert. This was a plea. He's crying, Alara thought, the blood draining from her face as the cold of the Utah winter suddenly felt less intense than the shock gripping her. What in God's name is in there? Alara immediately radioed Chief Malcolm Ridge, her voice strained with urgency. Chief Ridge was a man in his late 50s, portly with a perpetually tired, clean-shaven face and thin, combed-over brown hair. He was a political animal, careful and meticulous, having earned his position not through heroics, but through navigating departmental budgets and local politics. His public demeanor was affable, but privately he was risk-averse, treating the canine unit as a necessary, often troublesome, expense. Chief, this is Vance on Track 7. Kaiser has a critical, unprecedented alert on Container 44 Delta 9, requesting immediate entry and backup, Alara transmitted. Vance, stand down, Ridge's voice crackled back, laced with irritation. That container is Sterling Logistics, classified as a high-priority shipment, cleared by the federal task force just this afternoon. We are not opening a sealed priority container based on a dog's bad mood. Sir, you need to see this. He's not just alerting, he's in distress, Alara insisted, looking back at Kaiser, whose tears were now soaking his muzzle. This isn't an explosive or drug alert. It's something else, something human. The standoff lasted only minutes, but the tension was immense. Alara, knowing the political fallout but trusting her dog completely, used her tactical knife to carefully cut the heavy plastic seal, ignoring the chief's growing fury over the radio. Backup arrived. Officer Dale Hansen, a young, eager officer assigned to the K-9 support team. Officer Hansen was tall and athletic, a man in his late 20s with close-cropped brown hair and a clean, earnest face, whose usual easygoing manner dissolved into disbelief as he witnessed Kaiser's silent anguish. Detective Vance, you're overriding a direct order, Hansen began, but Alara cut him off, pointing her flashlight at Kaiser. Look at him, Hansen. Tell me that's a false alarm. Hansen took one look at the crying German shepherd and silently trained his rifle on the container door. Alara used the bolt cutters, the snap of the metal echoing harshly in the snowy quiet. Inside, the container was not filled with electronics or machinery, but boxes of old, decommissioned medical equipment, stacked high. The air was stale, cold, and strangely sweet. Kaiser, dragging Alara forward, ignored the stacked boxes and focused on a large unmarked wooden crate hidden behind a pallet near the back. He pawed at it frantically, his mournful whimpers continuing. Alara and Hansen wrestled the crate open. Inside, nestled on a thick layer of old blankets, was a small, fragile life. It was a 3-year-old boy, his small frame dressed in a navy blue knitted sweater that was several sizes too big, his little face pale and slack. He was breathing shallowly, heavily sedated, but his eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing deep pools of terror before closing again. Alara felt the familiar, crushing weight of her own past, the phantom weight of Holly's small hand in hers, recede only to be replaced by a fierce, protective rage. She gently lifted the boy, whose hair was the color of dust, and whose innocent fear was palpable even in his drugged state. We found him, she whispered into the radio, the raw emotion momentarily stripping away her professional facade. A boy, approximately 3 years old. He's been sedated. Kaiser, exhausted and trembling, collapsed in the snow, his mission accomplished. The boy's face, small and vulnerable, mirrored the image in Alara's mind of all the children who had gone missing, including her own. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a revelation. Kaiser hadn't been smelling explosives or drugs. He had been smelling a potent cocktail of sedatives and pure, unadulterated fear. The aftermath on Track 7 was a stark tableau of cold reality, painted against the swirling white canvas of the Utah night. The moment Alara confirmed the presence of the little boy, Ethan, now tightly bundled in Officer Hansen's arms, the depot shifted from a desolate freight yard to a frantic crime scene. Paramedics rushed Ethan away, their sirens cutting through the heavy snow with a sharp, insistent cry. K-9 Kaiser, still visibly distraught but calmer after Alara had cradled his head for a brief, silent moment, was led away for an emergency veterinary assessment. His body was stiff, his eyes still holding that unnatural moisture, the silent evidence of a trauma his canine training had never prepared him for. Alara stood by the gaping maw of Container 44 Delta 9, the cold biting through her parka, her gaze fixed on the empty space where the wooden crate had been. The scent of chemicals and stale air was faint, but the memory of Kaiser's tears was indelible. She knew, with the fierce certainty of a mother who had lost everything, that this was not a random act of criminality. This was orchestrated, systematic, and deeply personal. Her phone rang, the caller-ID flashing the unwelcome name of Chief Malcolm Ridge. He arrived minutes later, his figure bulky in a too-tight winter coat, his perpetually weary face set in an expression of controlled fury. He was flanked by Lieutenant Frank Miller, a man in his mid-40s, lean and sharp-featured, with a military-precise haircut and a close-cropped goatee dusted with gray. Miller, a stickler for procedure and efficiency, carried himself with a perpetual air of skepticism, having spent his career distrusting anything that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet, especially gut feelings and canine alerts. "Vance, you have a problem," Ridge stated without preamble, his voice low and hard enough to cut through the wind. "You opened a federal priority shipment, disrupted a major international logistics chain, and risked a potential incident, all based on your dog crying. Chief, we found a child, a 3-year-old boy, sedated and packaged like cargo," Alara countered, her voice steady. "My dog's mood saved a life. You call that a problem?" Miller stepped in, his voice a smooth low register that somehow sounded more critical than Ridge's bluster. "The problem, detective, is that the system has already filed this under isolated incident caused by a disgruntled employee. Sterling Logistics is already demanding compensation and an official apology for the damage to their reputation. The political weight alone is suffocating." "Sterling Logistics," Alara repeated, the name tasting like ash on her tongue. It was the same name the shipping manifest had borne. "That company is tied to Senator Theodore Ted Sterling's foundation, the Sterling Hope Fund, isn't it?" Ridge's eyes narrowed, a warning glint flashing. "Stay out of politics, Vance. You stick to the evidence. The evidence shows a rogue employee. Vincent Vincross was responsible for the container. He's already been arrested at his home. Standard procedure, case closed." Alara's own personal trauma flared. "Case closed? Just like that? 12 reported false alarms from Kaiser in the last 4 years, all tied to the same intermodal transport hubs used by Sterling Logistics. I've read the reports, Chief. Kaiser has never alerted on drugs or explosives in those instances. He was alerting on something else, something human." The accusation hung heavy in the frigid air. Ridge simply sighed, pulling out a memo. "Kaiser is 11, Alara. He is past retirement age, showing signs of severe joint degeneration, and now emotional instability. The department has scheduled his final psychological and veterinary evaluation for tomorrow morning. You understand what that means." The subtext was clear. One more false move, and Kaiser would be retired, removing the inconvenient truth of his anomalous alerts from the department's records. After the chief and Miller departed, leaving Alara with the unsettling feeling of a cover-up already in motion, Alara drove immediately to the forensic lab at the University of Utah Medical Center. The city, usually bustling, felt hushed and heavy under the persistent snow, the only movement the scrape of plows on the distant avenues. She needed an ally, and she knew exactly where to find one, Dr. Lena Sharma. Lena was a woman of 38, a brilliant forensic chemist and toxicologist. She was petite, with a vibrant energy that contrasted sharply with her focused intensity, often seen wearing glasses perched on her dark, neatly tied back hair. Lena and Alara had met years ago during the harrowing search for Holly. Lena had been instrumental in analyzing trace evidence that ultimately led nowhere, but the shared grief forged a bond of trust deeper than any professional relationship. Lena was unconventional, often pushing the boundaries of traditional forensic science, a quality Alara desperately needed now. "The sedative is unusual," Lena said, her voice a low murmur in the sterile, brightly lit lab as she adjusted a complex chromatography machine. "Most traffickers use generic benzos, easy to acquire, easy to administer. This is different. I'm finding trace elements of a compound derived from an obscure Himalayan plant, combined with industrial-grade ketamine. It's a designer mix meant to induce deep, lasting sedation while also being extremely difficult to trace or categorize." Alara stared at the readout. "A designer mix? Why go to that trouble?" "To avoid dogs like Kaiser," Lena replied, pushing her glasses up. The Himalayan compound is designed to saturate the immediate olfactory environment, effectively masking the common detectable scents of ketamine and human distress. Most canines would register the plant compound as a novelty and dismiss it. But Kaiser smelled the whole picture, Alara finished, running a tired hand over her face. He smelled the chemical interaction, the panic under the mask. Precisely. And he smelled the intense stress hormones. The children are terrified before they're sedated, Lena said, her gaze sympathetic. I'm going to run a full analysis on the trace scent from the wooden crate. I need time, but I might be able to create an olfactory signature profile of the source lab. Do it, Lena, and keep it off the record. As Alara left the lab, the cold sting of the air reminded her of the fight ahead. She checked her phone and saw a single photo message from the hospital, a picture of little Ethan, his eyes closed, clutching the corner of his navy blue sweater. The sight of that tiny lost boy triggered a specific agonizing memory. Holly, 10 years old, standing alone at a bus stop, wearing her favorite blue denim jacket. The sudden image was a visceral blow, solidifying Alara's resolve. The chief and Miller could talk about political weight, but for Alara, this was now about the ghost of her own child. If Kaiser's tears could lead her back to one lost boy, maybe, just maybe, they could lead her back to her own. The only way to save Kaiser was to prove his anomalous behavior was the key to unlocking a far greater conspiracy, one that might lead straight back to the powerful, impenetrable facade of the Sterling Hope Fund. The chill that penetrated Alara's bones after leaving Lena's lab was not merely the Utah cold, it was the icy touch of political manipulation. Canine Kaiser was temporarily housed at the precinct's specialized canine facility, sedated after his assessment. The preliminary vet report was damning, but medically ambiguous. Severe stress response indicative of extreme olfactory overload, potentially exacerbated by age and pre-existing joint deterioration. The report subtly paved the way for retirement, satisfying the department's need to eliminate the unpredictable element. Alara spent the early morning hours reviewing the 12 old reports, the false alarm reports that spanned 4 years. Each one detailed a different container at a different rail yard, Denver, Chicago, Houston, but all were linked by the same two constants, Kaiser's anomalous alert pattern and the Sterling Logistics shipping label. Her first confrontation came at 9:00 a.m. in the precinct's drab cinderblock conference room. Chief Malcolm Ridge and Lieutenant Frank Miller sat across from her. Ridge was agitated, rubbing his temples beneath his combed-over hair. Miller, with his precise goatee, was reviewing a thick file with clinical detachment. "Vance, we are done with the conspiracy theories," Miller began, his tone cold and factual. "Vincent Cross, the freight clerk, has confessed to selling space in the container to an undocumented migrant smuggling operation. He used the sedatives to keep them quiet. He is being charged. Sterling Logistics is clean, and the case is closed. End of story." "Smugglers don't use high-grade designer sedatives derived from rare Himalayan extracts, Lieutenant. They use cheap over-the-counter medication," Alara retorted, leaning forward. "And they certainly don't use Sterling Logistics priority channels." Ridge slammed his hand on the table, the rare display of temper rattling the coffee cups. "Sterling Logistics is not just some shipping company, Alara. Their chief benefactor, Senator Theodore Ted Sterling, called me personally. He is one of the most powerful men in this state, a philanthropist, a benefactor to this department, and the founder of the Sterling Hope Fund, an organization that literally finds safe homes for at-risk children. You are accusing him of involvement in human trafficking based on the tears of a geriatric dog." Senator Theodore Ted Sterling was indeed a figure of immense influence, a man in his early 60s whose public image was immaculately crafted. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of thick, prematurely white hair and a firm, square jaw that spoke of authority. His eyes, though often described as warm and piercing, held a certain practiced sincerity, the kind that came from years of public performance. He always wore bespoke Italian suits and carried himself with the stately grace of someone who believed himself beyond reproach. His philanthropic work, particularly the Sterling Hope Fund, which facilitated emergency placements for orphaned or vulnerable children, had earned him national praise and a reputation as a modern saint. Alara knew the risk, but the memory of Holly, 10 years old, blonde like the snow, gone without a trace, fueled her. "I'm not accusing him, Chief. I'm following Kaiser's lead. and Kaiser's leads always point to Sterling. If the senator is so innocent, why is he mobilizing his entire legal team to shut down an inquiry into a single freight container? Later that afternoon, Alara sought out the only human resource that had ever given her a lifeline, Sergeant Victor Vic Morales. Vic was the precinct's information broker, a man who dealt in the shadows of data. He was a stocky man in his early 50s, with a perpetually tired face hidden behind a full salt and pepper beard and thick-rimmed glasses. Vic wasn't flashy, he was meticulous, often wearing the same oversized, threadbare wool sweater under his uniform jacket. His personality was gruff, but he possessed an underlying loyalty, born from Alara, covering for him during a personal crisis years ago. Alara found him hunched over a bank of monitors in the cramped, poorly lit records room, the glow reflecting off his glasses. "Vic, I need everything you have on the Sterling Hope Fund," Alara instructed quietly. "The non-public stuff. Donor lists, facility locations, and particularly any staff who have left under duress in the last 5 years." Vic grunted, not looking up. "You're playing with fire, Alara. Sterling is a god in this city. You pull that thread, the whole sweater unravels, and you're the one who ends up naked in the snow. Kaiser and I are already naked, Vic. Just pull the thread." 2 hours later, Vic slid a worn manila folder across the table. It wasn't the data Alara expected. It was an internal affairs report concerning a Ms. Bethany Cole, a former senior social worker for the Sterling Hope Fund. Bethany Cole was described as a woman in her late 30s, highly regarded, who had been terminated 3 months prior for breach of confidentiality. Her photograph showed a woman with kind, expressive eyes and short, practical brown hair. "Cole raised hell," Vic murmured, tapping in the file. "She didn't agree with the fund's emergency placement policy. She claimed the fund prioritized wealthy, vetted donors over the legal rights of the birth families. She got hit with an NDA and a termination notice faster than a snowball melts in July." The report included Cole's final, frantic email to the fund's board, which mentioned specific concern over the transportation logistics. "I am certain they are moving the children like commodities," the email read. "They use specific channels tied to a shell company within Sterling Logistics. These children aren't being rescued, they're being sold." Alara felt a cold dread solidify in her stomach. Cole's concerns dovetailed perfectly with Kaiser's anomalous alerts and the priority classified containers. The emergency placements were not random adoptions. They were orchestrated sales, masked by Sterling's charitable veneer. Her heart pounded harder when she saw the date of Cole's termination. It coincided precisely with the final false alarm Kaiser had logged before his current critical alert. "Vic, I need to find Bethany Cole. Where is she now?" She packed up and left Salt Lake City right after she got the boot, but she used to frequent a diner near the old rail yards, the Iron Skillet, on 400 South, right by the old Union Station. Sometimes, people go back to where the trouble started. Vic's eyes, weary and knowing, met Alara's. "Be careful, Alara. This isn't just a logistics problem anymore. This is a person with a god complex, operating under the veil of charity." Alara drove immediately to the Iron Skillet, the snow now falling heavily again, thick flakes obscuring the windshield. The diner was a greasy spoon relic, its windows fogged, and its neon sign buzzing faintly. She found Bethany Cole hunched in a corner booth, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee, looking small and defeated, but the kindness in her eyes was still evident. Alara slid into the opposite side of the booth, the worn vinyl squeaking under her weight. "Ms. Cole, my name is Detective Alara Vance. I'm with the Salt Lake City Police. I need to talk to you about the Sterling Hope Fund. I need to know everything you told the board." Bethany Cole looked up, her kind eyes quickly hardening to suspicion, then softening again when she saw the desperate sincerity in Alara's face. "They sent you, didn't they? Sterling's people." Alara shook her head slowly. "No. I came because of a 3-year-old boy named Ethan. He was found this morning in a freight container. And because of my dog, Kaiser. He cried when he found him. He cried, Ms. Cole." The word cried seemed to be the key that unlocked the floodgates. Bethany Cole's eyes filled with tears, mirroring the image of Kaiser hours before. She finally nodded, pulling a napkin closer, ready to talk. The Iron Skillet diner was warm, smelling of stale grease and burnt coffee, a welcome contrast to the bitter cold outside. Bethany Cole, the former social worker, finished recounting her frantic internal memo to Alara, her voice cracking with the memory of her dismissal. The raw honesty in her eyes was all the confirmation Alara needed. They weren't placing children, detective. They were shipping them. The Sterling Hope Fund required all emergency placements to be handled via Sterling Logistics priority rail routes, Bethany explained, her hands gripping the coffee cup. I saw the paperwork. Shell corporations funneling adoption fees up to $200,000, all disguised as charitable donations. They were moving commodities to wealthy buyers. And the transportation staff, Alara pressed. They used contractors and former rail employees, people with intimate knowledge of the freight yards, people who could guarantee a container wouldn't be flagged. Bethany paused, her gaze distant. One name kept showing up on the manifest logs for interstate transfers, Vincent Vin Cross. He was their logistics specialist, a ghost in the system, but he managed all the high-risk movements. Alara spent another hour cross-referencing Bethany's information with the files Sergeant Morales had provided, establishing an irrefutable paper trail linking Senator Sterling's charity directly to the clandestine rail shipments. With Vin Cross identified as the key operative, Alara knew the next step wasn't police procedure, it was science, and the extraordinary nose of Canine Kaiser. That night, Alara drove to the discreet off-site canine training facility, a secluded warehouse miles from the precinct. She found Dr. Lena Sharma, the forensic chemist, already set up, her portable mass spectrometer humming quietly. Kaiser, though bandaged and subdued from the sedation, rose weakly from his orthopedic bed when Alara approached, his tail managing a slow, heavy thump against the floor. He's physically stable, but his mind is still reeling from the exposure, Lena reported, adjusting her thick glasses. I've completed the analysis on the residue from the wooden crate. The sedative is an alkyl ketamine derivative, highly potent, blended with that rare Himalayan extract you mentioned, Aconitum ferox. The blend is genius. The aconitum acts as an almost perfect olfactory blocker for common chemical signatures. But Kaiser bypassed it, Alara noted, kneeling beside the dog. He didn't bypass it, he smelled the combination. Think of it like a sound mix, Lena explained, switching to the metaphor of the musician. Most dogs hear the loud music, the aconitum. Kaiser, due to his unique, likely trauma-enhanced sensitivity, hears the faint sub-bass frequency created when the aconitum chemically reacts with the alkyl ketamine. It creates an almost unsmellable signature, an olfactory signature of panic, only accessible at that extreme sensitivity level. Alara looked at her partner. He was smelling the terror of a child trapped in the dark, layered under a chemical blanket. This was the key to Kaiser's defense and their investigation. Alara's new focus wasn't on standard drug tracking, it was on behavioral chemistry. Over the next 6 hours, Alara and Lena conducted intense, focused training. Lena recreated the subtle, olfactory signature of panic, using synthetic compounds and samples from Ethan's clothing, introducing the scent in minute quantities within a complex mixture of rail yard smells, exhaust, and lumber. Kaiser struggled. His aging body protested, and the mental effort was taxing. But Alara was relentless yet gentle, using her deep bond with him to pull him through. "Search! Find the silent tears, boy," Alara coached, her voice low and steady, connecting her own past trauma, the image of Holly, with the synthetic scent of terror. Finally, after numerous failures, Kaiser's head snapped up. He recognized the smell, the scent of the container, the sweet, terrifying smell of the designer sedative and trapped fear. He let out a low, controlled whimper, a distinct sound unlike his usual alert bark, a sound that Alara instantly labeled the Kaiser cried alert. With the scientific proof and Kaiser's new signature alert established, Alara returned to the precinct, armed with Lena's detailed, albeit unofficial, report. She needed to use this unique capability to hunt down Vin Cross before he could disappear. Sergeant Morales, waiting in the hallway outside the records room, looked stressed, his salt and pepper beard twitching nervously. "Ridge and Miller are trying to serve you the retirement papers for Kaiser. They've found a loophole in the K9 manual regarding documented emotional distress." "They can wait," Alara said curtly, pushing past him. "Where is Vin Cross's last known operational address?" Vic provided her with an address for a defunct railway maintenance depot on the outskirts of the city, now used as a temporary storage facility by Sterling Logistics. Alara knew she couldn't risk a standard sanctioned raid. She needed to find Cross, gather enough evidence to tie Sterling directly to the operation, and do it before Ridge could officially ground Kaiser. Dressed in civilian clothes, a dark wool coat over her tactical gear, Alara drove to the maintenance depot. It was a bleak, forgotten corner of the rail yard, surrounded by chain-link fences and barbed wire, the snow piled high against the corrugated iron walls. She led Kaiser, discreetly dressed in a plain black harness rather than his official canine vest, around the perimeter. The air was thick with the scent of old grease, iron, and dust, but Kaiser worked diligently, his nose low to the frozen ground. Suddenly, Kaiser stopped near a side door, partially obscured by a rusted dumpster. He didn't cry, but he gave the distinct, low, Kaiser cried alert whimper. Alara immediately checked the dumpster's contents, discarded. Coffee cups, fast food wrappers, and a single crumpled envelope addressed to Vincent Cross at the Sterling Logistics office. Cross was here. Alara positioned herself behind a stack of abandoned railroad ties. Through the depot's grimy window, she observed Vincent Vin Cross inside. He was a scrawny man in his early 40s, with a nervous, perpetually unshaven face and deeply set eyes, wearing a standard-issue Sterling Logistics safety vest over a faded flannel shirt. He moved with the quick, furtive energy of a rat, his hands constantly fidgeting. He wasn't alone. Cross was talking urgently to a man Alara didn't recognize. Dean Sterling. Dean Sterling was the senator's nephew, a man in his late 20s, handsome in a cold, arrogant way, with slicked-back dark hair and an expensive tailored leather jacket. Unlike his uncle, Dean carried none of the senator's practiced warmth. His face was hard, sharp-angled, and clearly accustomed to giving orders. He was leaning against a stack of crates, hands shoved into his jeans pockets, listening to Cross with an air of bored condescension. Alara watched as Dean handed Cross a thick envelope. "This is your final payment for the Ethan transport. Senator Sterling is extremely displeased with the loose ends. We need you gone. Today. You understand, Vin?" Cross nodded frantically, stuffing the envelope into his jacket. Yes, Mr. Sterling. The last transport. It's all set up. A private container heading south tonight. 10 children, all prepped." 10 children. The number hit Alara like a physical blow. She realized Vin Cross wasn't just a disgruntled employee selling space. He was the logistics manager for the entire operation. And the senator's nephew was his direct supervisor. This was proof. As Dean Sterling turned to leave, Alara realized her window of opportunity was closing. She had to apprehend Cross and get him to confess before Dean could report back to the senator. She drew her service weapon, Kaiser tensing silently beside her. This time, she wasn't just investigating a crime, she was interrupting a shipment. The frigid air of the abandoned maintenance depot was thick with the scent of old oil and iron. Alara Vance moved with the controlled precision of a hunter, her service weapon drawn, the muzzle illuminated faintly by the moonlight, filtering through the dusty windows. K9 Kaiser, despite his fatigue, stood silently beside her, his body a dark silhouette against the snow, ready to act on instinct. Dean Sterling, the senator's cold-eyed nephew, had vanished into the night, but Vincent Vin Cross remained. Vin, the scrawny logistics manager with the unshaven face and nervous energy, was frantically stuffing the thick envelope of cash into his faded flannel shirt. "Police, don't move, Cross. Hands where I can see them." Alara's command sliced through the silence. Vin Cross froze, his hands twitching near his chest. He was cornered, trapped between the stacks of discarded rail ties and the formidable presence of the detective and her German shepherd. He chose flight. Cross lunged towards a side exit, scrambling over a pile of used tarps. "Kaiser, apprehend!" The command was barely necessary. Kaiser, ignoring the protest of his aging joints, launched himself forward. The dog wasn't aiming for a disabling bite. He was aiming for control. He slammed his 80 pounds of muscle into Cross's legs, taking the man down in a heavy, echoing collision on the concrete floor. Cross cried out, the envelope of cash skittering away, his desperate attempt to escape foiled by the dog whose tears he had inadvertently caused. Alara swiftly secured Vin Cross, his thin wrists quickly cuffed behind his back. The adrenaline was a sharp burn in her veins, but she forced her voice to remain level. "Where are the children, Cross? Where is the private container heading tonight?" Cross was a study in panicked compliance, his breathing ragged. "I don't know, man. It was all Dean. He just tells me the time and the container number. I just managed the manifest. Back at the precinct, the interrogation room was sterile and cold, illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Lieutenant Frank Miller monitored the session from behind the one-way glass, his skepticism unwavering. Alara Vance, removing her heavy parka to reveal her dark police sweater, sat across the table from Cross, her ice-blue eyes fixed on him, projecting an unwavering intensity. You managed 10 children, Cross. 10 human beings packed like cargo, sedated with a designer chemical cocktail. Don't lie to me, Ilara said, sliding a photo of the sedated 3-year-old, Ethan, across the table. Look at him. His parents are going through hell because of your manifests. Who is really running this? Is it the senator? Cross flinched, not at the image of the boy, but at the mention of the powerful politician. The senator. He doesn't touch the logistics. It's the fund, the Sterling Hope Fund. They call it Emergency Sanctuary Transport. They say they're saving them from neglect, from bad parents, from the system. You believe that? I used to, Cross stammered, pulling at the cuffs. But then I saw the numbers. The adoption fees the fund charges these wealthy buyers, $250,000 per child. That's not charity, detective. That's a human auction. The pieces of the conspiracy were falling into place, but Alara needed the connection to her past. She decided to play her final, devastating card. 10 years ago, my daughter was taken. Her name was Holly Vance. Did your manifest ever include her? Did the Sterling Hope Fund save her, Cross? The question hit Vin Cross harder than Kaiser's body check. His unshaven face, already pale from fear, drained completely. He looked up at Alara, his eyes wide and vacant. He began to weep, not the silent, heartbreaking tears of Kaiser, but ragged, choking sobs of genuine fear and remorse. Holly Vance, he repeated, the name barely audible. That name. I saw that name in the old manifests. It was one of the first sanctuary transports. It was a special one, a high-priority, high-stakes operation. I wasn't involved directly, but I was tasked with destroying the original paper trail. Ilara's breath hitched in her throat. 10 years of sterile police reports, cold cases and dead ends. And now, a twitching, broken man on a cold floor was handing her the impossible truth. Why, Cross? Why, Holly? Why, my daughter? Ilara's voice was dangerously low, vibrating with suppressed fury. Cross lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. It wasn't random. Senator Sterling, he targeted you, detective. He knew you were investigating his construction firm back then, the one that collapsed due to fraud. He needed leverage. He needed to silence you by taking the one thing you couldn't replace. The revelation was a hammer blow. Holly wasn't a random victim of an opportunistic crime. She was collateral damage in a decade-old political vendetta. The man hailed as a saint, the senator with the pristine white hair and the warm, deceiving eyes, was responsible for her personal hell. Where is she now? Ilara demanded, slamming her hand on the table. Cross flinched violently. The senator kept her close. She's not gone. She was placed in an isolated, vetted location, a safe house in the remote Winta Mountains area of Utah. They renamed her Grace. It's a hunting cabin, owned by one of the senator's shell companies. It's where they hold the children before final placement if the regular rail transport is compromised. It's where those 10 children are heading right now. It was Sterling's contingency plan for an emergency like this. The details sent a wave of icy clarity over Ilara. The Uinta Mountains, the remote cabin, the 10 children, and Holly. She wasn't just chasing traffickers anymore, she was chasing her own daughter. Suddenly, the interrogation room door burst open. Lieutenant Frank Miller, his face tight with anger and professional betrayal, stormed in. That's enough, Vance. You're done. Your session time is up, and you've clearly coerced a confession under duress, Miller roared, pointing a finger at Cross. He's retracting everything about the senator. Get out of here. Ilara stared past him, a dangerous calm settling over her. Miller's aggressive intervention was too quick, too loud. It wasn't about procedure, it was about protection. You're protecting him, Miller, Ilara whispered, the realization hitting her with sickening force. You and Ridge, you're paid to look the other way. Miller paled slightly, his sharp features losing their rigid composure for a fraction of a second. You're off the case, Vance. You're suspended, effective immediately. He motioned to the 2 uniformed officers who had entered with him. Ilara knew the suspension was a maneuver to buy Sterling time to move the 10 children. and Holly before she could act. She didn't resist the uniformed officers. She simply met Miller's eyes with a look of pure contempt. "The cabin address, Cross. Tell me the address of the cabin," Alara demanded as the officers led her away. Cross, slumped on the chair, was babbling incoherently, repeating the same fractured phrase. "The old logging road, just past Mirror Lake. The cabin with the red trim." Alara was escorted out of the precinct, her badge and weapon confiscated. But as she drove home in her civilian vehicle, the icy calm remained. She had the address, the location of the final storage facility, the contingency plan. And somewhere, 10 years of agonizing silence was about to end in the remote, snow-covered mountains. She just needed one last ally, one last chance, the unparalleled nose of Canine Kaiser. The winter sun, usually a brilliant spectacle over the Wasatch Range, was obscured by thick, churning snow clouds, mirroring the chaotic internal storm tearing through Alara Vance. She was suspended, stripped of her badge, her service weapon, and her official standing. Yet, armed with a desperate address mumbled by a terrified Vin Cross and the impossible truth about Holly, she had never felt more driven. Alara's first stop after being escorted from the precinct was the Canine facility. She had to break her partner out. Canine Kaiser was confined to his run, looking utterly dejected, his muzzle resting on the cold concrete. When Alara appeared, wearing her heavy civilian wool coat and winter boots instead of her tactical parka, Kaiser sprang up, tail thumping, with frantic loyalty. "We have one more search, old man," Alara whispered, unlatching the kennel. "The big one." They drove to TNC Lena Sharma's lab. Lena, the forensic chemist, was already monitoring the police radio channels, her face grave. "Miller put out a bulletin on you, Alara, not for misconduct, but for mental instability and potential threat to a K9 asset. They're trying to discredit you before you even move," Lena warned, her hands flying across her keyboard. "But I have something for you." Lena handed Alara a rugged satellite phone and a small, state-of-the-art tracking beacon. "The address Cross gave you, the old logging road past Mirror Lake in the Uintas, it's too vague, but I used the trace chemical signature from Ethan's clothing to map out an aerial thermal profile of the area. I found a structure deep in the backcountry, off the grid, with an anomalous heat signature consistent with multiple human bodies. I've uploaded the coordinates to this phone. It's the cabin. You're risking your career, Lena." Lena smiled faintly, the first genuine warmth in the sterile lab. "You saved my life 10 years ago, Alara, when you helped me through my brother's overdose case. And Kaiser. He deserves to be a hero, not a footnote. Now go. I'll cover your electronic tracks as long as I can." Alara drove toward the Winta Mountains, the heavy-duty tires of her private SUV crunching on the snow-packed roads. She had two goals: rescue Holly, Grace, and the 10 children, and expose Senator Sterling. She called the one man she knew held the key to the official response: Chief Malcolm Ridge. Ridge answered on the third ring, his voice low and tight. "Vance, you are suspended. Get back here now before I issue a warrant." "Chief, I know about Holly," Alara stated flatly, the sentence silencing Ridge instantly. "I know Senator Sterling targeted me 10 years ago because of the construction firm investigation. And I know Lieutenant Frank Miller is on his payroll. Miller used his position to classify every alert from Kaiser as a false positive. He managed Cross's initial arrest. And he orchestrated my suspension to give Sterling time to move Holly and the 10 other children from a cabin near Mirror Lake. I have the coordinates." The silence on the line was profound, broken only by the static of the mountain pass. Ridge, the consummate politician who always preferred budget battles to real confrontation, suddenly faced a choice between protecting the department's benefactor and dealing with the ugly reality of his compromised staff. Miller's wife has been undergoing expensive cancer treatment for the last 5 years, Ridge finally admitted, his voice barely a breath. Sterling offered to cover the costs via an anonymous foundation donor. Miller provided logistical cover and manipulated reports. I chose to ignore it. I thought it was localized corruption. It's not localized, Chief. It's a human auction run from the highest office in the state. And my daughter is one of the items, Alara countered, her voice shaking with controlled emotion. You can continue to cover your political posterior, or you can use those coordinates to launch a full-scale sanctioned SWAT operation and save those kids. But you have less than 2 hours before the blizzard hits and makes the mountain roads impassable. Ridge was quiet for another long moment. Alara could almost visualize the battle waging in his mind, his carefully constructed career versus the overwhelming moral weight of his compliance. Miller is in the precinct. He's on the manifest team, pretending to organize the Vin Cross evidence. Ridge finally sighed, the sound heavy with defeat and a reluctant commitment to justice. He'll know the moment I move a sanctioned unit. And he's armed. I can't risk the children's lives. Then I go in alone, Alara asserted. No, you don't. You can't. You have no weapon, no backup, and no right. But I can't let Miller continue to win. A new resolve entered Ridge's voice, a flicker of the principled officer he might once have been. Meet me at the base of the Mirror Lake entrance road. Give me 30 minutes. I'll launch a minimal, untraceable response. And Vance, he added, the warning stark, if you are wrong, you're not just suspended. You're finished. You understand? I understand, Chief. Alara hung up, a small, grim smile touching her lips. She had done it. She had turned the political chief into an operational asset. 30 minutes later, Alara pulled into a snowy turnout marked by a dilapidated old welcome sign. She was met by two unmarked black SUVs. Out stepped Chief Malcolm Ridge, wearing his duty uniform and a concerned frown, and Sergeant Vic Morales, the records broker, armed and ready, his thick beard dusted with fresh snow. Vic was Alara's sanctioned, untraceable response, the loyalty of the precinct's most overlooked officers. We have 2 cars, 3 personnel, and no official logs. We're calling this a welfare check on K9 Kaiser, who may have wandered off, Ridge stated, handing Alara a shotgun from his trunk, its weight familiar and reassuring in her hands. This is not standard protocol, Vance. This is a hail. Mary pass. The coordinates, Chief. The children are running out of time. Alara tapped at the satellite phone. As they began their ascent up the treacherous, winding logging road, the blizzard struck with blinding fury. Snow fell horizontally, driven by gale-force winds, dropping visibility to mere feet. The road, already slick with ice, became a death trap. Kaiser, sensing the urgency and the impending fight, sat rigid in the back, his silent focus an anchor for Alara. They were forced to abandon the SUVs a mile short of the coordinates. Alara and Vic, tethered together for safety in the whiteout, navigated the final stretch on foot, Kaiser leading the way. The German Shepherd, using his specialized olfactory training, ignored the overwhelming scent of the blizzard and the thick pine, hunting for the minute trace of the olfactory signature of panic. Then, the static from the satellite phone cut out. "It's Miller!" Vic shouted over the wind. "He must have noticed Ridge's absence and tracked his location. He's coming." Alara checked the coordinates one last time. They were within 100 yards of the cabin. She had to choose, wait for the predictable confrontation with Miller or push forward to rescue the children. "Vic, flank right. Kaiser and I go straight in," Alara commanded, chambering around in the shotgun. "We save the kids first." As they broke through a cluster of thick pines, the cabin with the red trim materialized through the swirling white chaos, a small, dark structure silhouetted against the blizzard. Alara saw a faint glow from the windows, and the outline of a figure moving near a snowmobile. It was Senator Sterling himself, bulky in a heavy snowsuit, preparing to flee with at least 2 small forms bundled into the snowmobile's cargo sled. It was now or never. The drive through the Uinta Mountains was a brutal, terrifying dance with the blizzard. The snow, thick and disorienting, reduced visibility to mere feet, turning the world into a dizzying white tunnel. Alara Vance, armed with the shotgun and fueled by a decade of agony, pushed the SUV past its limits before abandoning it to join Chief Malcolm Ridge and Sergeant Vic Morales on foot. They moved as a desperate, unsanctioned unit. Alara, the suspended detective, leading the charge. Ridge, the chief of police, now a fugitive from his own department, providing armed cover. And Vic, the quiet records broker, navigating the treacherous terrain with silent loyalty. Kaiser, running low to the ground despite his failing body, was their compass, hunting the faint, synthetic scent of panic Lena Sharma had isolated. As they broke through the dense cluster of pines, the cabin with the red trim materialized, a dark, squat silhouette against the swirling white. Alara immediately saw the snowmobile near the porch, its engine running, and the imposing figure of Senator Theodore Ted Sterling. The senator, bulky in an expensive high-tech snowsuit that contrasted starkly with the rustic setting, was frantically securing two small bundled forms onto a cargo sled. "Kaiser, Ridge, Vic, flank left. I'm going in," Alara roared over the howling wind, pushing past the two men. The senator heard the crunch of her boots on the frozen snow. He spun around, his prematurely white hair whipped by the wind, his usually polished face contorted in disbelief and rage. He saw Alara, the suspended cop, the mother he thought he had neutralized years ago. "Vance, you foolish woman! I told Ridge to handle this," Sterling shouted, his voice hoarse. He immediately recognized the shotgun in her hands and, with chilling speed, reached inside his snowsuit, pulling out a small semi-automatic pistol. "Drop the weapon, Senator. It's over. I know about Holly. I know about the auction," Alara demanded, leveling the shotgun at his chest. Sterling didn't hesitate. "Holly is Grace now. I saved her from you. I saved all of them from the mess of the system." He began firing wildly, the sharp cracks of the pistol muffled by the storm. Alara dove for cover behind a thick-barked pine. Chief Ridge immediately returned fire from his concealed position, the sound of his duty weapon joining the chaos. The senator, distracted, ducked behind the snowmobile. "Vic, get to the back door! Kaiser, find the children!" Alara commanded. Kaiser didn't need a second instruction. Ignoring the bullets whizzing through the air, he charged towards the cabin, his movements driven by pure final instinct. The dog was a dark, low missile, following the scent straight to the single large window covered with thick, black plastic. He slammed into the window, shattering the glass and tearing away the plastic covering in a single, desperate effort, creating a clear entry point and exposing the interior. Inside the cabin, the scene was horrifying but contained. 10 children, ranging from 3 to 12 years old, were huddled together in a small bunk room, heavily sedated, lying on thin mattresses. Among them, sitting upright and clinging fiercely to a younger boy's hand, was a teenage girl. She had blonde hair like the snow outside, her ice blue eyes wide with terror, but also a flicker of fierce protectiveness. She was Holly, 10 years older, refined by a life Alara hadn't witnessed, but unmistakably her daughter. "Mom?" the girl whispered, the tentative, impossible word tearing through Alara's heart. "Is that really you?" Alara was frozen by the sound, the decade of silence broken by a single desperate query. It gave Sterling the crucial moment he needed. He burst from behind the snowmobile, aiming his pistol not at the armed men, but directly at Alara, the threat to his escape. "You die, Vance! You all die here!" Kaiser, witnessing the movement and recognizing the imminent danger, didn't hesitate. He was too far to reach the senator, and his aging legs wouldn't carry him fast enough. But he saw the small, vulnerable figure of Holly Grace exposed by the shattered window. He saw the mother who had saved him, now exposed to the bullet. In a final, magnificent act of selfless duty, Kaiser launched himself sideways, directly between Alara and the senator's line of fire. The sound of the shot was terrifyingly close, instantly followed by a sickening, wet thud. Kaiser crumpled to the snow with a guttural yelp, landing hard between the pin in Alara's boots. "No!" Alara screamed, a cry of raw, absolute grief that drowned out the sound of the blizzard. The senator, his attention briefly diverted, was tackled by Chief Ridge in a messy, desperate lunge. Ridge, sacrificing his political life for a final act of justice, wrestled the gun away as Vic Morales secured the perimeter. Alara dropped the shotgun, falling to her knees beside her dog. A dark, rapidly spreading stain bloomed across Kaiser's beautiful black and tan coat, right near his spine. "No, boy, no, not now!" Alara's trembling hands pressed against the grievous wound, trying to staunch the terrible, life-draining flow. The warmth of the blood quickly turned icy on the snow. Kaiser's deep brown eyes found hers. They were clouded with pain, but something deeper, more profound, shone through, the quiet satisfaction of a completed duty. He managed a single, weak lick to her wrist, a final gesture of loyalty and love. "Mom, he saved us." The voice was closer now. Holly Grace, having climbed out the shattered window, scrambled through the snow and dropped beside them, her fragile teenage hands joining Alara's on the wound. Alara was surrounded by the impossible, the love of the daughter she thought was lost forever, and the agonizing, imminent loss of the only friend who had stood by her side through the darkness. The reunion, the moment Alara had dreamed of for 10 years, was defined by the lifeblood pooling beneath the dying dog. "He's the reason, Holly. He's the only reason," Alara choked out, tears of sorrow and impossible joy streaming down her face, mixing with the snow. "Stay with me, partner! Stay with me!" Suddenly, a voice of authority cut through the chaos. Lieutenant Frank Miller, dressed in his uniform, emerged from the blizzard, his face pale, his hands raised in surrender. "I called it in, Alara," Miller said, his voice broken by shame. "I tracked Ridge's signal and realized what I'd done. I called the state troopers and the FBI before I got here. They're on their way. I can help stabilize the dog." Miller, the compromised officer, now stood ready to redeem himself. Alara looked at the man she despised, then at the dying dog who had brought them all here. She had no choice. "Miller, chest compression, now! Vic, secure the children. Ridge, cuff the senator and call those troopers. We're not losing him. Not now," Alara commanded, her professional instincts overriding her grief. The brutal, lonely cabin became a desperate triage center. Miller, despite his betrayal, worked quickly, using his military training to apply pressure to Kaiser's wound. Ridge secured the senator, his face grim with the realization of the political earthquake he had just unleashed. And Alara, her arms wrapped around her daughter, the shotgun lying forgotten in the snow, focused only on the slow, shallow breaths of the German shepherd. Kaiser, the hero who cried silent tears, was still fighting, anchored by the sound of his two girls, Holly and Alara, whispering his name in the storm. The airlift out of the Yanta Mountains was a blur of snow, flashing blue lights, and desperate action. K-9 Kaiser, wrapped tightly in thermal blankets, was whisked away on the first flight to the Emergency Veterinary Surgical Center, his life hanging by the thinnest thread. Alara Vance sat beside him, her hand gripping his fur, the blood freezing onto her coat. In the chaos, she only registered two sounds: the rhythmic throb of the helicopter blades and the quiet breathing of Holly Grace, who refused to leave her mother's side. Senator Theodore Ted Sterling was secured by the arriving state troopers. His powerful facade finally crumbled into a portrait of pathetic entitled rage. Chief Malcolm Ridge handled the media storm with unexpected competence, protecting the integrity of the operation while ensuring the focus remained on Sterling's monstrous crimes. The surgery to save Kaiser was a grueling 8-hour ordeal. Lieutenant Frank Miller, the man who had almost destroyed Alara, remained in the waiting room, not as an officer, but as a silent, guilt-ridden accomplice, waiting for a chance at redemption. Dr. James Chen, the chief veterinary surgeon, emerged exhausted but grimly optimistic. The bullet missed his heart, but it fractured his spine and severed a major nerve cluster. "He's alive. He fought like a wolf. But the blunt trauma and nerve damage, he won't walk again. He's permanently paralyzed from the mid-thorax down." The news was a heavy blow, but Alara felt a profound wave of gratitude. He was alive. "Thank you, doctor. He's a hero." In the ensuing days, the Sterling Hope Fund conspiracy unraveled spectacularly. Vin Cross's confession, coupled with the meticulous paper trail provided by Bethany Cole and the digital evidence Lena Sharma retrieved from Sterling's recovered devices, exposed the network. 26 high-profile accomplices, including corporate lawyers, adoption facilitators, and corrupt social workers, were arrested across 6 states. Thungniti C. Sterling and his nephew Dean faced a barrage of federal charges, their philanthropic empire reduced to dust. Lieutenant Frank Miller, true to his word, turned over all evidence of his complicity, leading to his dishonorable discharge, but he was spared prosecution in exchange for his full cooperation against the senator. The focus, however, was on the healing. Holly Grace, now safely housed with her mother, was a complex tapestry of resilience and trauma. 10 years of calculated lies had given her a life of privilege, private schools, European vacations, but had stolen her identity. She spoke with Alara not as a child, but as an articulate, guarded young woman trying to reconcile the memory of Janet and Richard Beaumont, her loving adoptive parents, who were horrified to learn they had adopted a stolen child and faced no charges, with the reality of her biological mother, Alara. "They told me you were killed in the line of duty, Mom," Holly whispered one evening, sitting beside Alara as they watched a tranquilized Kaiser sleep in his recovery kennel. "They made me proud of you, but they said you died a hero, so I wouldn't search. They were trying to protect themselves, sweetheart," Alara said, stroking her daughter's blonde hair. "But they also loved you. We're going to figure out how to be a family. A really complicated family, but a family nonetheless." 6 months later, the scars of the winter raid were fading. replaced by the persistent, hopeful green of a Utah spring. Canine Kaiser was thriving. After extensive rehabilitation, he was presented with a state-of-the-art, custom canine wheelchair, a shining testament to his resilience. He could move with surprising speed and joy, his powerful front legs propelling the wheeled apparatus across the ground. The police department, eager to restore public trust, decided against retiring Kaiser. Instead, he was granted a special commendation and certified as the official, full-time canine therapy dog for the Salt Lake City Police Department's newly formed Child Trauma Unit. The formal ceremony was held on a clear, sunny day outside the newly renamed Denver Salt Lake City Child Advocacy Center. A crowd of press, officers, and community members gathered. Chief Malcolm Ridge, his face showing the honest weight of leadership and regret, presented Kaiser with a medal. Ridge had since resigned from the political gamesmanship, choosing to focus on internal reform, working closely with Alara. Alara Vance, no longer suspended, but promoted to captain of the newly formed anti-trafficking task force, stood tall and confident in her uniform. She accepted the honor on Kaiser's behalf, her voice ringing with hard-won authority and gratitude. As she spoke, she looked out at the small crowd. In the front row sat Holly Grace, now fully enrolled in the local high school, applying her fiercely intelligent mind to psychology texts, determined to help other victims. Beside her sat Ethan, the 3-year-old boy in the navy blue sweater from the container, now laughing and chasing butterflies, clutching the hand of his mother, who had been reunited with him thanks to the evidence Alara secured. Lieutenant Frank Miller, now working for a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting law enforcement families with medical crises, stood at the edge of the crowd, his presence a quiet reminder of the capacity for redemption. The emotional climax arrived when Alara wheeled Kaiser forward to greet the children. Ethan ran straight to him, burying his face in Kaiser's coat. The German Shepherd, his tail thumping furiously against the ground, licked Ethan's face with profound tenderness. Alara's voice, thick with emotion, addressed the crowd for the final time. Kaiser, my partner, taught us that real heroes don't just smell explosives or drugs. He taught us that trauma has a signature, a faint chemical whisper that only unconditional love can detect. They called it anomalous behavior. We now call it the olfactory signature of salvation. She paused, looking directly into the camera. For 10 years, I prayed for a miracle to bring my Holly home. God didn't send an angel. He sent a German shepherd. He sent a dog who cried, whose silent tears exposed a web of corruption and brought every child, including my own, back from the darkness. His sacrifice saved my family and saved this city. Alara placed her hand on Kaiser's head, the German shepherd leaning into her touch. If you are watching this, if you feel lost, if you are looking for a miracle, remember Kaiser. Remember the power of truth, the fierce loyalty of love, and the fact that sometimes God's greatest miracles are delivered on 4 paws. We ask for your support. Share this story, comment your prayers, and help us fund the Child Trauma Unit, because every tear, human or canine, deserves to be wiped away. May God bless you, and may God bless the keepers of the silent tears. Friends, the journey of Detective Alara Vance and Canine Kaiser reminds us that God's miracles don't always arrive on soaring wings. Sometimes, they come on 4 loyal, powerful paws. Kaiser's ability to smell the silent tears of trapped children, his olfactory signature of salvation, and his final, selfless act of taking the bullet was a divine act of grace, reminding us that the purest love often requires the greatest sacrifice. In our own lives, when we face moments of darkness and desperation, we must keep our faith and remember that God sends unexpected heroes to light our way. If this story of faith, sacrifice, and redemption touched your heart, please share this video, comment below with your prayers for those in need, and subscribe to our channel to join our community of hope. We pray that God blesses you and your family always. Amen.